Today we're talking with Cryptzone. I've got Chris McNulty, who's CTO, and Jamie Bodley-Scott, who's the product manager for Cryptzone. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Let's kick it off by talking about, this has been quite a year of breaches with Anthem and Sony, and of course last year was Target, and it doesn't seem to end. In your minds, what's the underlying cause? Why are we still facing these breaches?
It's a great question. I hate to even mention a single name because the next time this is going to come up, there's going to be yet another company out there. Exactly. It's what's fascinating is if you look at the role of information security, we're fighting a war, and we're losing, and we've been trying to figure out why. And part of it is something, in the market, we're there working with our customers to try to solution it for them. But to help understand it a little further, we recently surveyed a number of our customers and folks out there, and we found some really interesting statistics out there. The one that really surprised me the most is even with all of that going on, let's say it's our marketing department's best friend to have all this news out there. Over half of the organizations we've surveyed, their information security budgets are flat or declining, which is fascinating to me because you would sort of expect to see it moving up. The other thing that was really surprising to me is that we're fighting a war with really old technologies. Now, VPNs have been around for a while, for 20 years plus. And they can be an essential component in information security, but for many organizations, it's the only one. And over half of them haven't touched their technology there in 3 years. So you have all of these things going on, breaches, the risks and the damage from those attacks is higher than ever. No new technology is coming around with it, and no budget to solve it. So it's probably, definitely, something we can see persist.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of old thinking still going on as far as network security is concerned. And the guys who are our adversaries, if you like, they are very agile, very quick on their feet, and they can exploit things that are there for just moments of time. And I think today we are looking at technologies which are slow and ponderous in a lot of organizations. They cannot respond very quickly, and they're based on designs effectively that were state-of-the-art 10, 15, 20 years ago when companies' networks were the thing you defended. But nowadays the model has moved on, and we need to think about defending different things from this traditional firewall model, this network model, which has been enjoyed by so many companies for so long.
Right, and my own projections say that the security industry as a whole, so all spending is growing at 24% annually. So if there are companies who have flat spending, then they're falling way behind the curve. And most of the spending must be coming from the huge companies that are spending hundreds of millions.
It depends what they're spending their money on.
Yep.
I think one of the issues is that you can spend your money on a lot of disparate and disconnected systems. And even though the industry talks about defense in depth, I actually think if you buy a significant number of systems and they're not very well joined together, so that it doesn't provide a proper end-to-end thinking in terms of the way your network security works, then your adversaries can just kind of find ways through all these different things that you've purchased. So I think it's really important that spending goes to the right places. And I think spending money on, for instance, integrating systems together so that they work seamlessly and holistically together is actually more worthwhile than just buying another thing that is the fashion or the fad or is the top thing that's of interest at the show at the moment, for instance.
The interesting thing is, obviously, at Cryptzone we have solutions, and we think that we'd like to see some of that budget go towards solutions like we have in the market. When you go back and look at all the breaches, though, there's no single vector that explains them, but one of the most common things is not just a lack of spending generally, but a lack of spending in people. So the other thing that organizations really need to be mindful of is sustaining the importance of information security as a career, maintaining longevity and expertise in the people who are charged with that. That is one of the best things an organization can do to help protect against becoming the next Anthem.
Great point. And while you've got old systems doing traditional business, you've also got independent drivers of the move to the cloud, the move to mobility. How's that impacting the exposure?
Well, that's a really interesting area because the move to the cloud is actually a sort of game changer in terms of the topology. I actually think a lot of companies are worried about move to the cloud because they don't understand how to secure it. But I actually think that very fact that people are having to move to the cloud is actually forcing a rethink about the traditional security models that you've used before.
Yep.
So I actually think it's a way of actually getting people out of the sort of comfortable network think state that they've been in for so long. And they need to totally rethink their security mechanisms, if you like, because the cloud is here and everyone is using it.
I was talking to a CSO at a Fortune 50 company last year. We were talking about the move to the cloud. And, I'm a Microsoft SharePoint MVP, and I do a lot with the partner council there and see a lot of things, probably from an Azure perspective more than anything else. And he's looking at some of the security enhancements there, and he's like, I don't trust the cloud. And the truth of the matter is, I question people when they say that they don't trust the cloud. Unless you have a highly disciplined information security practice, it is hard to contend with the level of spend that the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts have in the world. So I sort of reject the idea that the cloud is inherently less secure. That doesn't mean it's automatically secure either. You need to harvest the investments and the learnings that you have from your on-premises days and be able to apply those out into a cloud architecture. They are definitely higher profile targets because why do you rob a bank? All the money's there. Well, all the information assets are at these much larger players out there. Fundamentally, it's the problem that all the information assets are in one place, but they tend to be more highly secure. We think the advantage of that is it also provides a simpler surface for us to monitor and control. One of the things that we've had great success with is being able to extend our software offerings from a traditional premises model out into the cloud to allow the way that you would secure information on premises to be as flexible and dynamic as what you want on premises, be able to do that in the cloud.
So tell us more about Cryptzone's product offerings.
Well, I mean, Chris picked up on a point there, which is this flexibility. One of the things that we've been working on recently is a version of what you could call the software-defined perimeter. So it's very much changing the approach that you take to defining what you want to defend. In the past, you've defended a static network, possibly with VPN connections coming into it. And I've always thought of those VPN connections as being extensions of the network outwards. So you're creating something that kind of looks like a virus. If you know the traditional kind of images of the virus, it's actually got a very large surface area, and therefore it's very easy to attack. And therefore what we want to do, if we're moving to a world where we have the software-defined perimeter, is start to shrink down the actual area that you're defending. So you have a much, much smaller attack surface. And the sort of model that we're looking at for the software-defined perimeter really creates microclimates around individuals. So you, for instance, might need access to 3 systems only. They might be on-premise, they might be in the cloud. It doesn't actually matter. But you will have a little microclimate created around you which just has connections to those 3 resources only, and that is the extent of your world. There is nothing beyond that. That creates a tiny attack surface. And what is more, if the intruder gets through that attack surface, they're only going to see what you could see. They're not going to be able to explore the rest of the network and try and find all that lovely credit card data that's stored somewhere, or that file called passports.txt that's sitting on a server somewhere. They simply won't be able to find that because it's not within this little microclimate that's been created.
So we used to call that identity-based networking, where you set up a policy and the person had certain assets that they could connect to, and that was it.
I think identity is sometimes a little oversold, though, in that. Because thinking back to what Jamie said earlier, the attack vectors are more nimble, they're more flexible. We have 0-day attacks, and you need flexible responses and dynamic policies to be in place. The problem with relying too much on identity and identity alone is that the nature of your identity and the nature of your connections and your information experience is going to vary through the course of the day, through the course of an hour as you move from one device to another, and being able to monitor that in real time and control it. One of the attributes of our technology is we put every connection in a one-time encrypted tunnel just for that session, just for the purpose of that application, to nothing else. That gets to the idea of containment. I like to ask people, do you know why the Titanic sank?
Yeah, because, well, first of all, they ran into an iceberg.
It ran into an iceberg is the obvious answer.
Yeah.
The Titanic sank in the end because the waterproof compartments, at the initial crash, they flooded 5. Titanic could float with 5. But the containment didn't go up high enough. So as the water got higher in the front compartments, it spilled into the 6th, into the 7th, and she was too heavy to sink. In theory, if the containment had been done properly, Titanic might still be afloat somewhere today. But containment's another other key attribute that we bring to the market with our solution. We call it AppGate Secure Access.
Okay, so...
And we're doing containment in a slightly different way as well, because you mentioned identity. Now, identity is something which historically you tend to do up front.
Yep.
So we have this concept called logging in that you do, which is a very strange concept if you think about it, because you are still you before and after you log in. You haven't actually changed. And when you log out, you're still you. So I don't really understand the concept of logging in and logging out. What we need to do with identity is when you want to consume a resource, at that point in time, we should check and see what rules apply, which may include identity rules. And if they apply at that time, then we let you access the resource. And Chris gave the example of time. Another good thing to think about is you could fly from Europe to America. And if you logged in the morning in Europe, should you still be connected to the same services that you had when you arrive on the soil in the States in the afternoon? You know, is that correct? I don't think it is. I think your situation is totally different. And the fact that you said, I'm Jamie at 9 o'clock in the morning is irrelevant in a different continent at 5 o'clock in the evening.
So what does a deployment look like, getting somebody up to speed with Cryptzone?
Oh, it depends, and we have a number of offerings. With AppGate Secure Access, we've invested heavily in virtualizing that. So if you want to be tied to traditional hardware and traditional data centers, there's a way of doing that. But increasingly, we have a distributed architecture. So we virtualize the controller, we virtualize the access points to be able to flexibly deploy them on premises, into private clouds, into Azure, into Amazon, and other environments like that.
So now you've got a process where somebody is working or they're on the road, mobile device, doesn't matter where they're coming from, but you'll use a lot of criteria, maybe identity, maybe the device, maybe the location, to determine what they have access to.
Right.
Yep.
And it's going to shift in the course of the device and the course of the day. And we may still want to have access, but we may want to calibrate it. So if you're coming onto my network on a device I've never seen, from a country I've never seen, maybe I accept the first level of who you say you are, but challenge you with something else. Or continue to, or if I see that you, to Jamie's example, you were in England, you show up in the US 5 hours later, I may want to check on that. And I may say, it's too fast. You know, we see that a lot of the time. This is the Superman login problem.
Right, yeah.
You know, when you see someone logging in 5 minutes away from 1,000 miles away, something's wrong.
Right.
And so those are all parts of the things that we need to take a look at. So the implementations are relatively clean. We see them go down, I'd say, 2 paths. We can absolutely revolutionize all of your edge-based and perimeter-based approach. We work in the software-defined perimeter. So if you want to completely rip out infrastructure and replace it and move to 100% attribute-based, recognition-aware security topology, we can enable that. And frequently organizations don't change that rapidly. You know, you were talking about its old line thinking, and it needs to evolve. And so it may be dealing with securing the behavior of privileged users or privileged accounts first, or some highly sensitive applications, and then to be progressive with that.
I also think there's some significant changes you can make to other stuff that you might need to use as well. So if you deploy a sort of software-defined perimeter well, and you use the sort of technologies that we are using in our own secure access product, then there's a lot of other technologies that historically you would have had to roll out as well that you probably don't need. So our system is able to prevent DDoS attacks on your infrastructure. It's able to do a kind of IDS-IPS that's actually identity-based, as you mentioned earlier. So we can actually put rules in the system for user-driven bad things as well as user-driven good things. So a lot of systems today, simply say you're allowed this and this. But there's no reason why I couldn't put into the system a rule that says you must never try and connect to that. I mean, you may not be allowed access to it, but the fact you're trying should be enough to stick up a red flag and say, why on earth are you trying to connect to that server? You haven't for the last 3 years, So why are you doing it today?
And then what kind of actions can you take when you see something like that happen?
Well, we're building a real-time system because the kind of attack vectors we've got now are so intense and so fast that unless the systems can respond in real time to what looks like a threat, you will have lost all the data that you're trying to keep. So the model we're looking at now is actually a firewall that effectively is using types of IDS, IPS type technology to interact with the user. So when you try and make a connection to something, at that moment in time, a policy will say only if something is true. And if that is something which you, the user, can fix, we will tell you how to fix it immediately. So a very simple example could be, for instance, that you are required to type in a one-time PIN for that particular server that you're trying to connect to. So at the moment you send the first packet to that server, we detect it, we know that the OTP has not been typed in, say, for the last 3 hours, and the rule says OTP younger than 3 hours, so you have to type in an OTP there and then. So the users can kind of fix the problems themselves. If the problems are very severe, then sure, we may have to set an alert flag, and a sysadmin may have to come and clear that. But effectively, we're moving to this real-time control over what you're allowed and what you're not allowed, and that's a very critical differentiator.
I think it's important to take a look. One of the key design concepts we use across all of our products is understanding that in any information transaction, rather than solely relying on legacy user ID, there are actually hundreds of contextual variables I need to look at about the device, about the location, about the asset that's being sought, and we apply those in real time. If we pivot to one of our other solutions, our Security Sheriff offering, we're dealing with another level of defense in depth. With Security Sheriff, we're looking at the text in real time of any unstructured data, files and documents, looking for things that may have changed in there. Someone may have inadvertently posted their credit card number in a document in a public area. So we can step in real time, intercept that, and say, you don't mean to do this. We're going to redirect this document to somewhere else, or we're going to encrypt it, quarantine it in place, track it, being able to fully automate the process of content governance in addition to what we do with network applications.
So this is great. You could actually enforce an enrollment process, for instance. If somebody's already authorized to get into the system, but now you had a new application, and you could say, hey, you've never done this before, but we see that you should be authorized, but please fill out the enrollment form, be it for a healthcare application or something.
We're effectively trying to split the authorization process into two. So if you like to think of it, the upfront piece uses the minimum possible information to suggest what you may be allowed. So that could include something new that you've not used before. Mm-hmm. And then the conditions we apply to each individual one. So for instance, we could have a learning system that knows you've not connected to a particular resource before, and for the first few connections, we require a higher level of trust that you are who you say you are. And once we've learned that you're using this system on a regular basis from a particular type of Windows 7 computer that's usually on this IP address, then we could lower the requirements for you to connect to that resource. So that's the advantage of a dynamic real-time system.
Got it. Is it hard to set up those policies in that learning system?
Well, we hope it won't be. We have a very nice-based UI,
right,
which enables you to create what we call filters for this kind of initial introduction to what you're entitled to, and then conditions which are related to each and every specific thing that you're connecting to. But one of the examples I like to go back to really relates to one of our current products that we have today, which is AppGate, which effectively generates a set of firewall rules specifically for you when you log in, so very similar to the sort of other products that we do, because we're great believers in the user-centric nature of the world. And a lot of people say to me, but isn't it going to be really hard to create firewall rules for every user? I've got like 1,000 users. Mm-hmm. Am I going to be like typing firewall rules until I die? Well, my simple answer is we create the rules in real time when you log in from a policy. So if I write 5 policies only, from 5, you just simply do a 5 factorial, mm-hmm. and that means I can generate 120 different firewall rules by just writing 5 policies. So you can have hundreds of different rule sets running in a system, and it's only got a few policies defining the creation of those. We have one customer in the States here who used to use firewalls, and they moved to using our AppGate products some years ago. And the thing they discovered was the thousands of rules that they had in their firewalls were replaced by 100 or 2 in the AppGate system.
Cool. So you mentioned customers on both sides of the Atlantic. How broadly is your customer base distributed today?
It's global. We have over 500 customers concentrated where you might expect at the enterprise level throughout the global 500. Heavy focus on government, financial services, healthcare. Those tend to be the organizations with the largest install bases and the most sensitive data and the greatest need for compliance and info security. But there's always some others and some very small manufacturing organizations, and so they come large and small, but they're globally distributed. We run operations out of our headquarters just outside of Boston. We also maintain operations throughout Europe, as well as our Asia Pacific Center of Excellence for software development as well.
Is there a big professional services component of getting these deployed?
I wouldn't say it's big. We have an effective capability there, and we also leverage a dynamic and rapidly growing partner network as well. We design the tools kind of throughout to be relatively clean. We want all of our solutions to be able to provide value as rapidly as possible after an installation. So they're designed that way. They're powerful, they're flexible, but they can be adapted in most cases inside of a week.
I tend to use a model which is a very simple graph that just has the 45-degree line going up from the origin. So if you put in a little bit of effort, then the system will immediately start delivering a little bit of performance. If you put in a medium amount of effort, it'll give you a medium amount of performance. If you want to make the system really big and complicated, then it's available, it can do it, put the effort in, and it will return those rewards to you. But it's one of these things where with a little bit of effort, you get a little bit of return. It's not one of these systems where you have to spend weeks and weeks doing implementation before you get anything out of it at all.
The one thing that I like to think that we empower, going back to when we surveyed our user base, looking at where do information security policies come from, the vast majority of them are still in the hands of IT, which again is part of that backwards thinking. But the challenge is that it's too hard to expose a line of business to the implications of the policy or to the implementation. There's no review, there's no engagement. We're breaking that down. We have rule bases and tool sets that can be consumed by business users so that they can be much more flexibly engaged in defining and applying those policies.
How do most of your customers find you? What problem are they looking to solve? It's not like they're, when somebody's looking for a new firewall, they want faster or bigger, or an identity system. There's already a line item for that, and they're replacing some old stuff. How do they find you?
Well, there's definitely some very interesting use cases. There's a large financial organization who came to us for the problem of controlling and reporting those privileged accounts. Those system administrators, those root level accounts, making sure that they knew where they were being used. They were only being used in the way that they were supposed to be used. And because they were a chartered organization, they had to report in all of that usage. And they were spending 48 days a quarter just doing that reporting. We came in very quickly, got them onto our AppGate platform, and they reduced that 48 days down to a single day.
Got it.
The other thing I think is companies that have business complexity is another area. So they look at the tools that are available to them, traditional firewalls, traditional network models, maybe VLANs, whatever they're looking at, and they try to implement the sort of security controls they know they need using these kind of legacy components, and they start to get into a bit of a mess, a bit of a knot, and they're not able really to deliver the sort of output or outcome that they're looking for. So that's another reason why it's reasonably easy to introduce the sort of concepts we have of user-based security and designing the security around each session that the user runs. And then they find that that actually massively simplifies the sort of network layer approach that they were trying to take to solve the problem. So anyone who has complexity, often gets stuck and looks for our help.
Got it.
We also hear a lot from organizations that are moving to the cloud and trying to figure out how can I still do the kinds of controls that I had on premises in the cloud, and whether they're looking at their application structures or their content structures, just getting visibility into what people are doing, how they're doing it, and how can they shape that behavior is a place where people come to us as well.
Got it. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks again. It's fantastic being here. Really appreciated the time.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. We really enjoyed it.